All right. G'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro, and we've got some collectivism to dissect tonight. I've got a very special guest, someone who I've not spoken to before, but I've followed for quite some time. He has a fairly significant Twitter following where he's posting lots of good stuff. He also writes dystopian fast fiction, describes himself as a polemicist, a libertarian, and I do believe that those two tend to go together more often than not, the polemicist and the libertarian. But without further ado, I'll invite to the show Mr. John Goddard. How are you, John?
Very good, Pietro. Thanks for having me. And can I say that the name of your podcast is fucking awesome. It's fucking
You know,
awesome.
we get it. I can't tell you. I reckon there's been more occasions where I'll have someone comment somewhere saying uh, something about the fact that we have the hammer and sickle on the logo and saying that communism is stupid and bullshit and you guys should, be ashamed of yourself. And I'm like, okay, you've definitely missed the point there.
That's a really low IQ take. You can tell that's an IQ test. It's
Yeah, yeah,
not.
you're not allowed to watch. We're gonna
Yeah.
distill our really low viewership even further by if you don't get this shallow joke. Um, but look, I'm very excited to talk to you. I've read a bit of your fast fiction, your dystopian stuff, and I think it's great. Uh, there is something about dystopian writing, and I don't know, I like it a lot, so maybe it's just me, but I feel like there is something about dystopian writing that humans are just drawn to. Is that I don't know, why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I don't know why people are drawn to it, especially like, I don't know, when I was in my teenager years, reading like 1984 for the first time was just so mind-blowing. Or reading Atlas Shrugged. It's just phenomenal. I think it's that thing, like if you take these weird ideas from today and like extrapolate them out to the nth degree, seeing what could go wrong. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's human nature, like just trying to imagine um, future possibilities and trying to take it out as far as you can. But yeah, I think dystopia is really, really fun to get involved in. And it's like a cool way, like if you just go out there and you say, oh, I think digital ID is bad and we should abolish it, like no one's going to listen to you. But if you like tell a cool little fictional story about, some guy who maybe, I don't know, gets locked out of every public service because he had the wrong thought one day in his work, then people kind of understand it better. And so for me, I actually always used to think that fiction was like kind of silly and childish. But I actually realized that it's the best way to communicate ideas. And so maybe that's why dystopian fiction is intriguing, because it's like a really good way to communicate yeah, dystopian ideas.
I think 1984 is probably that really central text that probably, I don't know, every kind of edgy kid read as a teenager. I read it as a teenager, and then I only reread it probably in the last year or so, and I was shocked as a teenager. I think I looked at it more as that sort of hey, here's this wild idea of what the world could turn into. But it was quite shocking the most recent time I read it. Especially a lot of the stuff about, thought crime was a lot more real and is a lot more pertinent to how I think society is kind of going than it was the first time I read it. You're almost, I don't know, you're almost being shoved out of ideas with what to write your dystopia about with some of the stuff that's being brought in. Have you found that at all?
I can't keep up. I can't keep up. One of the like my favorite tropes that I love to like trot out in short stories is like euthanasia chambers. People getting offered euthanasia if they're too poor to like keep up or whatever. And that is just proliferating everywhere. I saw another thing today about it being available in Sweden. I think you can get euthanized in a pod for $20. It's just like sometimes I don't know why I bother, man. The world is like fucked enough.
Canada was the first. I don't know if it was the first, but I
Canada.
remember
Well,
hearing
yeah.
about Canada was bringing in the voluntary euthanasia stuff pretty liberally, I guess.
Yeah, well, theirs is weird because if you I mean they were suggesting it to people with depression. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I remember seeing stuff about something like that.
and I think if people yeah, they were giving it to people as an option as well if they couldn't afford whatever medical treatment was in front of them, which is just so fucked. It's absolutely so fucked. And it's weird, like I see a bunch of there's like mainstream media propaganda, almost lionizing people who get euthanized, which is really weird. I saw this story about a 24-year-old girl that got euthanized, and they were like painting her as a hero. It's like, what is going on?
What was heroic about it? Like what in their lionization?
I've got no idea. I don't know. I mean, she was obviously sick. Um, but yeah, they were painting her as a hero, and I thought that was just like a really weird. It's just a really dangerous rabbit hole to go down into. I mean, obviously, but yeah. And
Is
for
is the
anyone who's
idea?
like, for anyone who's conspiracy theorist minded, seeing the glorification of assisted suicide in mainstream media is very stressful.
Is the idea there that like you recognize that you are a burden to society and therefore you heroically take your life before you burden, the collective?
I think that's it. Yeah. If you're not, if you're negatively impacting GDP, just take yourself out. Don't be fucking selfish about it.
Heroic, truly, truly
Heroic.
heroic.
Heroic. Yeah.
So you am I correct in saying I think I read that you're a libertarian on your website. Would you identify as libertarian?
Yeah. I think so. I think so.
Um, yeah, no, sorry, go
Yeah.
on.
I mean, I find it difficult to align. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't think like, obviously, no person can fit strictly into any of those boxes of whatever political ideologies there are. But yeah, like libertarian for sure. Yeah. And I think I've always been that way. I think if you're like a little bit rebellious and don't like being told what to do, then yeah, being a libertarian is the way to go. But then I think obviously like I'm not very good at political schools of thought and stuff. And I know like when you go into libertarianism, then there's like a whole, you can be different sorts of libertarian, like a Rothbardian is fully like a bit more chaotic. And then I think there's others, but I don't know about that shit. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone, and I think of a few people who watch this are part of the Libertarian Party, and I remember when I first joined the Libertarian Party, I was much more naive than you are in thinking, oh wow, this party made up of entirely libertarians in the most statist world that's ever existed. They must all get along great. They must all be fighting the good fight and championing the cause and pushing together against the system. In reality, it's not that at all. It's much more of um, fighting amongst ourselves, noticing the minute differences between
Mm.
libertarians, and then all of the energy that people have is expended inward more than outward, unfortunately. So, I mean, I don't blame you in not wanting to, narrow yourself down into a box. But
Mm.
let's stick broadly to libertarian principles, a libertarian way of
Mm.
viewing the world. Just, I guess, let's say, acknowledging the fact that the growth of the state is alarming. Um, when did that realization dawn on you? Or I guess you said pretty early. When did that anti-authoritarianism turn into a more concrete idea of how your views lay?
Um, Oh, I think like everyone, I got radicalized during COVID. I've said this so many times because for most of my life, my view of the government was like, I don't like it. It's just a bunch of bureaucrats doing dumb stuff in Canberra. It doesn't affect me. Going to concentrate on stuff. And then in COVID, when I found out that they could lock me down, lock me in my house for no reason, or lock me out of my state or whatever, I was just like, holy shit, something's going on. And I started to pay a little bit more attention. And then and then you start to look at the statistics of how fast the state's growing, how fast taxation revenue is growing and things like that. And you go, holy shit. And I think it makes, like, when you think about it at the most basic level, it makes sense because every entity or organization or whatever just wants to grow and give itself more power. That's obvious. That's why we have a separation of powers. So yeah, I mean, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, like the most basic Rothbardian insight, if we want to stick to it. I mean, you mentioned Rothbardians are radical. I love
Hmm.
Rothbard, so let's
Yeah,
let's
bro, me
go that
too.
way.
Me too. Wait,
I'm starting to narrow you down.
have you read Bastard as well?
Yes, I've
Yeah.
read the Law by
Yeah, The Law,
Bastiat
yeah.
a couple of
That's fucking
times.
awesome, bro. And I actually saw a clip today. I was scrolling through your feed and I saw a clip. I don't know who you were talking to, but you were talking about the difference between law and morality,
Hmm.
which I thought was super, super interesting. I actually wanted to talk to you about that because there's this theory. of natural law, which you've probably heard of. And I think Thomas Aquinas has written a whole bunch about it. And I fucking love this because I really get into like legal stuff. And where do I start with this? So there's like a difference between man-made law and like the natural law of the universe, right? And I think like the further out of congruence those two things get, the more chaos you kind of see in society. There's this excellent academic paper, if you can call an academic paper excellent, that was written in 1946 by this German lawyer, talking about how man-made law kind of man-made law basically allowed kind of Nazism to take over the state, and it they basically like utilized it to kind of affect their totalitarianism. And the whole thing is about that. It's like there's a danger in just saying, oh, well, this is the law now, we have to follow it, is basically it. So in Germany during that time, they had a saying called that was, well, the law is the law, which is just like, yeah, well, that's the law, it's done, but we have to follow it. And I just wish they fucking taught like lawyers that, or at least politicians, whoever's making the legislation, judges as well, because I mean, technically the judges are meant to keep all that in check. But yeah, we really need to, just look at how far removed from morality some of our legislation is. And even in America, up until like 1917, Christian principles actually formed part of the common law. So there's, I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes. I know that I'm rambling a little bit, but stop me if I'm getting annoying. But there's like common law, and then there's statutory law. And so judges can kind of apply common law to different scenarios if the statute has gaps in it or whatever. That's like a broad, basic explanation. But yeah, so they like in America up until 1917, and from its inception till then, they could, if there was gaps in their law, they could kind of like look to the Bible, which I guess is closer to what we would describe as like a natural law. They could say, oh, well, our statute doesn't provide for this situation perfectly. Let's have a look at something more natural, more natural. So yeah, I don't know. I think we've strayed a long way from that.
Well, I mean, if you look at Bastiata is great. In fact, I think we'd just been talking about, or had recently read Bastiat before we did that episode that you're referring to, where we were talking about the law. But the law is it's bizarre when you think of the way that people perceive the law nowadays. And I mean, even the whole profession of, I know you work within the law and lawyers and all the rest of it, and it's become so convoluted. But the most basic interpretations of, Bastiat, of what the law should be is, that idea of protecting property and nothing else. Like, protecting property from infringement. And you can extrapolate from that, your person is part of your property as well. So it's not harm to the person, and it's not, theft, and it's all sorts of things can come into that from that angle there. But you compare that to what we think of the law as today. The law today is 10,000 pages of, regulation and red tape, and without even going into like some of the speech and stuff like that, things that were never even in the realm of what the law should touch on by those initial definitions. And it's, when you look at it that way, it's become like, it's perverse beyond reconciling. We have accepted that realm, and it would require, I mean, unless you go back and some people are willing to remove a lot of that propaganda from their minds by themselves, exploring and reading, Bastiat or Rothbard or whoever it may be. But for the average person, there's no hope. Like, how can you dismantle that for the average person?
It's impossible. And it's so complicated that people just, they're worrying about their own lives. And it's like, what, I have to figure out some legal principles as well. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. That's the same thing with like central banking. Like, to actually properly understand what's going on there, like, it would take a long time, and most people just don't give a fuck. So they're just going to roll with it. But it's interesting that you spoke about property, because this is like the reason that collectivism and communism is so fucking dumb, because property is like the most core principle or the most fundamental principle to the way our entire society works. Like when you actually understand what property is and how many different things it affects, that's why collectivism can never work. Because if you remove the concept of private property from society, the entire thing collapses. Yeah, and it's crazy, man. And yeah, the state should basically protect your property. I think that's that's about it.
Why do you think? I don't know if you agree with this. I think Australians have a propensity towards collectivism more so even than certainly more than our American brothers, but more so even than I'd say other places. Uh, why do you agree? And what if you do? Why do you think that might be?
Yes, I do agree. And I have no idea. I've been trying to get to the bottom of this as well. I had a really interesting discussion with John Ruddick the other day, and his view was that that wasn't always the case. The first people that came over here were super intrepid freedom lovers, and they just kind of went out, and there was no government telling them how to do their new development or make their new town in the middle of nowhere that they found. And then over time, it's kind of ossified and become a bit more corrupt and big government. I don't know why that is. I have one theory. I'll test this out with you actually, because I've tested it out with some people. Some people have said I'm dumb. Some people have said I'm smart. But I'm really interested in knowing what people think. So part of the love for like a big government is the need for safety. Everyone needs to be safe. And Big Daddy government can come along and just say, look, I'll make you safe. Just give me your freedom and all your tax dollars, and it's fine. And I have a theory that part of the Australian psyche has become, I don't know, or Australians are very timid, or they know that they can't protect themselves because their guns have been taken off them, and they don't know how to defend themselves physically. And I think on a psychological level, that kind of plays into their everyday actions. Because if you think, like, a lot of people don't agree with this, but I think this is the right conclusion, that every disagreement that you have, and the world is just conflict, every conflict will be resolved physically ultimately. People try to say that we've evolved beyond that, but we just haven't. I think that's not true. And so if at the back of your mind, you know that you have no weapons and the government has weapons, you can't do anything against it. When the government locks you in your house, you're too scared to protest because the cops have guns and they're going to shoot you with rubber bullets, for example, if they lock you inside the room, let's say. And I think that really fucked Australians, but I could be wrong. But that's just a theory that I have. What do you reckon?
I agree with you that the world is ruled by violence at its core, right? And it's the libertarian ideal of the non-aggression principle is by convincing enough people that the best way to manage society is to all adhere by these principles, and therefore the threat of violence is used in defense of life, liberty, and property of one another, and therefore that establishes peace. But you need the threat of the ability to use force to defend yourself, or to someone who can defend yourself. You can employ a company or something for that means. It doesn't have to be you specifically every time. Some people have a lower propensity to violence, obviously. But we have delegated that entirely to the government. I think we can pretend like violence has no place in the world, but the truth is we have accepted that violence is now limited to the government. I don't know if I agree with you that it's the no guns thing, because I would say, I don't know, I would say it predates the no guns thing, this Australian propensity towards, because I mean the banning of guns, the Howard thing that he outlawed the vast majority of firearms. I think that was met largely with acceptance and adulation and not wanting to be like the horrible friends in America. I think Australians already had that prior to that moment, for that moment to even have been possible. So I don't know if it's just the guns thing.
Yeah, it might not be just the guns thing. I mean, lots of people say they don't agree. But then it's like, well, what is it? I mean, maybe Australians are more empathetic, or they're more happy to say, yeah, I mean, we should look out for each other. And that's not a bad thing. I think that propensity for Australians to not want to look like the bad guy, be like, yeah, I guess I can share a little bit more, is probably abused by the government, because If they want more tax dollars for something, they can really kind of turn the screws on that emotion, and just get it out. And that's how we end up in a situation where we've got the NDIS, where like we're paying for sex workers for disabled people for some reason. Like, I don't fucking know. I can't even get my own sex worker.
But that's the least of it. Half of everyone I know now works for the NDIS in some form or another, and they're the only people earning
Bro,
any money. Like,
bro, the entire economy is just NDIS.
yeah, it's all
It
just
is.
fucking trips to Disneyland for everyone.
Oh,
That's
I saw the stats. It's fucking absolutely bonkers. I think it's like 2/3 of new jobs created in the last year were NDIS or something like that. And there's this guy that I follow on Twitter. I forget his name. I'm not going to look it up because we're talking, but he posts a bunch of these stats. He's some economist. And he had a chart showing new job creations in Australia over like the last 20 years. And it split it in between, it split it um, between public and private jobs. And in the last 4 years, if you took out private jobs, if you took out public jobs, we've nosedived. But yeah, it's all just public job creation. And I think now the government, or the public sector, is like almost a third of our economy. I think it's 15% of our workforce is employed by the state. And that's not if you don't include all the industries that are like reliant on those juicy government contracts, like law, consulting, construction, all that sort of stuff. The entire economy is just, I mean, I keep telling people that we're living in communism. They've just described it well. No one fucking believes me.
it's I mean, it's completely true. And I guess to your point before, like we were talking about how it is that the government convinces people to give up their freedoms. I think you're right. Part of it is that safety thing, and we saw that during COVID, right? Unequivocally, people were willing to give up whatever freedoms they could in order to get not even the reality of safety, but the perception of safety. They're also willing to do it for, through feelings of guilt. So, taking advantage of Australians' empathy for one another. The NDIS is the clear example of that. And through these mechanisms, through stealth, yeah, that they have woven their way into now. It's become inconceivable to remove some of these things because what are you gonna get rid of that entire industry? What about all the thousands and thousands of people who work in that? Okay, you're right. You've now created a situation where you would have to temporarily ruin a bunch of people's lives in order to set a balance that would overall, right somewhat the rest of society. But it's become too painful now to be able to start righting those wrongs in a way that is acceptable to the vast majority of people. I think you're right. We are there. We're at the point. We're past the point of no return, probably without something
Mm.
exceptional.
Yeah, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like the more people that are reliant on government jobs for their income, they'll vote for the big government party. And it just kind of snowballs. I mean, you know this. I'm preaching to the choir, but yeah, that's how it works. And I mean, like, fuck, if I was on, a good wage and I didn't have to do anything, I wouldn't want it to end either. But the reality is that every single person that's on that has a cushy government job is they're parasites surviving off the hard work of people like us. And it's like, I don't like, obviously there are some people I mean, I know people who work in government who are doing great things and work very hard and deserve the money that they get. And I reckon that's probably like 10 to 20% of them. It's like Twitter, you could buy the government, cut down 80% of the workforce and it would still function. It's just all the fat. And the fat is egregious because we shouldn't live in a society where there's a portion of the population that are just surviving off the work of the others. Everyone should survive off their own work if they can, and if they can't, then there should be a safety net for them.
Yeah, well, it's Rothbard who says that the only institution that exists in the world that doesn't create anything of value of its own is the government. So, I mean, there's a few points to that. I think, firstly, the 20% of people who work within government who function, good workers and create value or whatever it may be, there is the obvious conclusion to draw. I think that if the government didn't exist or if it was vastly reduced in size, these people would flourish in the free market. They would be exceptional at plying their trade in whatever replaced the government, because obviously the services would need to be provided. If humans want something, someone will provide it for them for money. Like that's the most natural thing that the free market teaches us.
Mm.
Um, is that basic insight there. But I mean, what's left to write a dystopia about if that's the world that we exist in?
I don't know. I don't know. I've got no idea, man. It's hard. It's hard to think of new shit because they're like the communists are so good at making dystopia themselves. I'm writing a novel at the moment, which I think will be cool, and hopefully by the time it's done, it's not reality. You know,
You've got to outpace
like, yeah, I've got to outpace it. I'm fucking writing furiously over here.
it.
Yeah,
Every
and
time you
so
turn on the news, it's like, fuck, they've taken another one of my plot
got to
lines.
take that chapter out. Hell, Albo's
It's a
done it to me
history.
again.
It's
Yeah,
a history book by the time
history.
you release
It's
it.
a history. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing that I'm trying to do in the novel, which I don't think I forget how 1984 ended, because I haven't reread it for ages. But there's another dystopian novel I reread recently called We by Yevgeny Zemyatin, some Russian dude, and that was the inspiration for 1984.
Okay.
But it had an ending that was quite sad. And so the thing that I'm actually trying to do in the book is to give it a happy ending, so that it ends up being like a dystopian novel with a vision of hope, which I'm fucking shit at doing. It's so much easier to write a sad ending, but I think
Yeah.
it's not the right thing to do. So hopefully somewhere within there, there'll be like, even if it's outdated a little bit, there'll be like some message as to, you know, that we're not all cooked and doomed to live in this like technocratic communist hellhole forever.
Yeah, well, 1984 does end with the main character, I forget his name, Winston or something,
Winston,
uh,
yeah.
accepting that he loves Big Brother and into his heart, and
Oh,
giving up any semblance of rebellion that he'd clung to for his entire life. So I think the last line is "I love Big Brother."
oh no.
So yeah,
Well,
you'd be breaking new ground with a happy ending at least.
but do you know what? The fact that like, if you look at dystopian novels ending that way, and the fact that we're still fighting against communism almost 100 years after 1984 was written, it's hard to escape the conclusion that humans are actually just fucking doomed, which is kind of sad when you think about it. But like, this thing is like collectivism, communism has been disproven. We know it's wrong. We know that it's not the most ideal system of governance. We know that capitalism is superior, but for some reason, it's just always around, and it's making it like it's cool to be a communist now. There's a fucking Marxism convention at Melbourne Uni every year out in the open, and you get. Actually, this is a good question for you. What do you think is like? Are you more offended by the Nazi salute or the hammer and sickle?
I'm not offended by the Nazi salute in the slightest, because, like, why would I be? It's an ideology that was tried, failed, and lost. And people pretending to be offended by it are trying to weaponize it to call whoever their political enemy is a Nazi. If you don't, eh, whatever, if you aren't completely offended by it, then likely they're going to use that to term you as a Nazi as well. It's ridiculous. The hammer and sickle, like, I mean, it doesn't offend me because it's a very real threat. I mean, while it's been rebranded and no one, well, hardly anyone would still flourish the hammer and sickle. What you said earlier, that we've seen that capitalism is superior to communism, and we all know that now. Yeah, you and I know that. And anyone who's honest about how they look back at history knows that. But the easiest way to grasp power and to expand power is to feed the lie that we are doing this for you, and therefore we need to centralize more of this. And that is, socialism that leads to communism. So I don't think that this consensus, while there might be a sort of written consensus in the history books, this idea that capitalism trumps communism, I don't think is true at all. I think, in fact, if anything, most, if not all of the world is going into the opposite direction on that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm deeply offended by the hammer and sickle, deeply, because I think communism is just so like just so dumb. It's like so fucking dumb. It would work if we weren't humans. There's this great guy on Twitter called Hitch Slap. I have no idea what his real name is, but his name's Hitch Slap. And he hosts spaces, and what does he say? He says communism is the right idea in the wrong species. Because, like he uses the example of ants. It's like an ant would happily die for the colony because all the ants in the colony are basically the same level, and their only focus is the greater good. But with humans, I'm not like, I wouldn't die for you. No offense. I like you. And if someone was saying bad shit about you, I'd be like, no, he's a good guy. But like, I'd die for my family, my wife, parents, things like that. But as it gets further and further out, like maybe you're an Australian, so maybe I would have some connection to you. But then if it goes to like some random person on the other side of the country or some random person on the other side of the world, humans have a lower propensity to go out of their way to support that person. I mean, people love to kind of virtue signal and say, yeah, I care about the children in Yemen or whatever, but they're not getting on a plane and going over there and helping them and bringing them back. Maybe they'll send $5 if it means that, if it's easy, if it takes their card, if they can pay wave it. So yeah, I mean, yeah. And that's why I think people in Australia, like for me in Adelaide, supporting some welfare recipient in Queensland makes no sense. And I had another point that I was going to make, but I kind of forget where I was going with it. But I'm deeply fucking offended by communism. And this is crazy, bro. Like, you can get Adam Bant going on Twitter being like, yeah, I'm going to introduce price controls, some fucking crazy outdated communist idea. And everyone cheers it. Everyone's like, yeah, that is good. But if another politician, I don't think any politician would run on this, but if someone was like, I want to bring back the White Australia policy, they get put in jail. But I think I think the level of anger that the general public has towards like something like Nazism, for example, compared to something with like communism, which had a much, much worse effect on the entire world, it just seems out of proportion. I don't understand why that is, whether it's like the propaganda or like whatever. I don't know. What do you think about
that? I think, well, it's all manufactured. Most of what we are told to think and feel about certain things in the world is manufactured. And I'm a teacher. You see this no more than when you're in the classroom. And if you are going to approach, like if I approach a topic that I know what the media and the consensus view around the world is, but I get to that topic before my students who aren't very wide readers or informed about the world, if I can get to them before the consensus view, most of them will agree with me. Like, for example, I'm dead against funding of any sort of the war in Ukraine against Russia. Like, first and foremost, because why are we funding any war overseas when we ourselves are struggling under inflation and it's our money? And, if you agree with the war over there, you send your money. Don't send my taxpayer dollars. But even beyond that, like the broader context of it being that, Ukraine is a corrupt country in and of itself. It's being propped up. They're flirting with putting it in NATO. They're pushing Russia to the very extreme until Russia eventually has retaliated. And if I say something like that, and if I portray that view to students of mine, and under the, I'm anti-war. I don't want people dying. I think it's stupid that people are dying. I think they should sue for peace. They had a peace deal way back in 2022, which Boris Johnson was encouraged by the US to go and tell them not to accept that peace deal. If I portray it like this, my students will agree with me. But already, if I go into a class that's a year older, or students that left school a year or two ago who have taken in the rest of the manufactured story and told what to believe, and this is the humanitarian thing, and anyone who cares for mankind, cares desperately about the Ukrainian plight, and whether Kiev is Russian controlled or Ukrainian controlled or something stupid like that, then their mind is already made up and they're already obscured to that. And I think when you look at it on such a small scale, like a year or two, and it's just a case of whether I got there for, whether I managed to make my case before they're indoctrinated or not, it's all manufactured. It's not a genuine belief. And I think the Nazi thing is the same thing. We are told on repeat, on blast, that the worst thing of all time to ever happen was Nazism. Well, communism has killed more than Nazism ever did. And yes, granted, Nazism wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but it's almost a deflection. It's almost a way of deflecting away from this other evil, which is rebranded and packaged to us in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the like one of the main issues is that everyone gets their, or not everyone, but the vast majority of people get their information from the news. That's what they're relying on. Like people are watching The Project, bro. Someone's watching Waleed Ali and being like, educate me." Like, what the fuck? All those.
Worse is that I see. I think a lot of especially this sort of new Greens push for communism, comes from younger people. Like the vast majority of their voter base is really young, and they prey on that fact that they don't understand why rent control is a bad thing. Because if we appeal to the empathy of Australians, yes, I don't want this poor single mother who can't afford her rent to have her rent go up. So I can understand that rent control is good, and only the rich fat cats who own properties would be against it. Like you can understand the empathetic argument for it without the knowledge because they're kids. They don't know the rest of it. And so they exploit that. And what's worse is that the people who are watching Waleed Ali and ABC and the Project and all of that, it's not the fact that it's the kids themselves. It's the fact that it's the education class, the academic class above them. And that's where all those ideas come from. That's completely infiltrated.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I don't know, man. People just need to open up a book. And it's like, I find it interesting when people have such a strong opinion on something that's happening right now, like the Ukraine war, for example. I mean, we're a few years in, so you can kind of like start to pass it all out. But you know, an invasion that happened yesterday, like in the week after October 7 or something, when people had opinions about that, like you have no idea. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
You have absolutely no idea. Like we're only really going to be able to figure out the kind of machinations of the global political environment now in like 5 or 10 years, when people have written books about it and they've researched it properly. And, you know, hopefully it's not biased, but there'll be a whole bunch of biased shit that comes out. I don't know.
The only safe way to come out with an opinion about something, as it's happening or as soon as it's happening, is to go with the mainstream. Like if you are trying to be intellectually honest about it, you can't know. Like you're right. How could you have known in the outbreak of the war? Right. Okay. Well, it has to be Ukraine are the good guys and Russia are the bad guys or whatever else. We have to like. How can you know anything about that? Like no one fucking could point to Ukraine on a map prior to
Yeah.
the invasion. I doubt
Yeah.
most people can point to where Israel or Palestine is.
No one fucking knows. No one knows. I mean, people in the know, like people who understand Ukraine knows, but like who fucking knows about Ukraine? No one knows. We don't care. We're in an island in the middle of nowhere. Like
That's right. Like most people, well, I don't know. I was going to say most people can't name all of our states, but I'm sure I'm offending a lot of people by saying that.
we don't have that many. You don't have that many.
Yeah, that's right. That's a fair
You know.
point.
Okay, so what do you reckon about I think that libertarianism, and this is kind of my black pill. I think that yeah, libertarians or even like classic liberalism, like classic conservatism is doomed to fail in Australia. I don't see any scenario where the pendulum swings back that way in any real manner because of kind of what you touched on before. There's too many people dependent on the government. There's too many people reliant on the housing market being propped up by central banking. Like our system, I think, is too ossified for meaningful change to occur. And so I've been thinking about what the solution to that is. And there's some people who are of the opinion that we need to get like-minded people within the political parties and try to take them over and then affect change from the inside. I think that'll fail. But what do you like? Is there any like cool, like we're not doing like a violent takeover, but like, I mean, Australia's big. So some idea that I've been toying with is like, could you secede a little bit? Like, what about Western Australia? Like, what happens if one day someone becomes Premier of WA and people fucking love him? He's like a cult figure. And he's like, we're pulling out. Like, we have resources. We don't need the rest of the country. We're just going to do like a fucking laissez-faire paradise over here. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a great speech that Hans Hermann Hoppe made, who's a great Austrian economist, libertarian. He was the protege of Rothbard's. He was Rothbard's student, so same vein, you know. And in this speech, it's called "What Must Be Done," and you can find the speech transcribed into written form online for free. The Mises Institute has it. They disseminate it pretty widely because it's pretty well known. But essentially, his thesis is that that is the only solution, right? Is we can't turn this monolith around. It's too far gone. Fighting from within the political system is not going to work. And the only way is through secession, and secession first on very localized scales, and through a reliance on natural elites, like elites who have been formed naturally, not through government selection and through, you know, bureaucracies and through favors and whatever, like people who are just exceptional in their field and can stand as exemplars themselves. And through this, eventually it's by local areas and by convincing the people around you and by quiet, peaceful secession, whereby it's more hassle to enforce that you don't secede than it is to allow you. And then slowly through city states, and he goes into a lot more depth, which I'm bastardizing the idea now by trying to give the shorthand. But that is a one theory which has some credence. I would also say, like, I mean, I'm a part of the Libertarian Party, so I've not given up on the political tract. I'm more sort of, I mean, I'm so desperate at this point. I'll try everything all at once, and I'll take it all. I mean, I agree. It is. I do tend toward being black-pilled from time to time, and I try not to be. But that is like, it's the only logical conclusion to draw from this. If you are looking at the world and thinking, oh yeah, there's a libertarian utopia around the corner, you aren't looking at the world correctly. So I'm willing to go down swinging, but yeah, I'm also willing to try everything at once.
Yeah.
It's actually, so that exact question that you asked me is a question I've got written down here to ask you. So I hope you have some answer for it. You mentioned before that you spoke to, you had I think you did a live stream with John Ruddick a couple of weeks ago. I love John Ruddick. I've had him on the show a bunch of times. I'm a big fan of his. So do you see any solution in the John Ruddick political, trying to affect change from the political realm? Obviously, he's not doing it from within a major party. He's doing it from, you know, the outside of the Libertarian Party. Do you see any future there yourself?
No. I mean, I love what John Ruddick is doing. I think he's fucking phenomenal, and like, also just a great dude. But I just think the system is kind of, he's kind of pushing uphill, in a big way. In a big way. I mean, it would be great. Like, sort of, yes. I mean, if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, although I don't know, because Trump kind of did that to the Republican Party. In a way, he took and this is one way of looking at it, which might actually be incorrect depending on who you listen to, but he took like one half of the American Uniparty and basically took it over by force, which is one way to look at it, and he did a good job. So I think if you do want to do a political takeover, it has to be done in one of the major parties. So like someone like Senator Antic, I think if he got a massive cult following, could take over the Liberal Party and actually do something. But I think the issue is, like we've seen with Trump, and I don't like talking about American politics when it's being fucking recorded, because I don't really know that much about it. But just from like snippets that I see, I think Trump can be like pretty heavily influenced by like deep state kind of things, like bureaucracy. And so I think, yeah, I don't know. It's a very complicated question, and I don't know what the answer is, but like the conclusion that I reached is the secession. So I want to listen to that speech that you mentioned, because I really do think, like, if you get what happens if you had 20,000 like-minded people and you had a massive block of dirt and you just said to Albo, I'm not paying tax anymore. I don't want to be involved in what you're doing. I mean, I'm really obsessed. Have you read about micronations?
No, I haven't. From just the name, it sounds like it's probably a similar idea to this, but go on.
It's self-explanatory. Like, there's small countries that aren't really countries, but they kind of are. There's one, I got obsessed with them ages ago, and I read a whole bunch about them. There's one in WA, and it's just this small, it's like a farm. And it's this guy that's like, I'm my own country. I forget what he called it. I've got a whole bunch of his propaganda printed out in my cupboard because he's got this website. You can go there. He's written so much stuff. And he's got like his own passport. He's written to the UN. He's been asked to be recognized. They didn't recognize him. And yeah, you can go there. He's got his own currency and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's just him and his family, like on a farm. And I also think they're trying to get him to pay tax, and they're taking him through court and stuff. So you have to have I think you have to have a fair few people, and you have to have a fair bit of kind of, I guess, willpower to sit through that. And I don't know at what point Albo would get the fucking tanks to roll up and like actually put you all in jail for not paying tax. But I think this civil disobedience is going to be a more effective solution to the big government problem than just trying to get in a political party and doing it that way. I also think it'd take fucking ages. Like Pauline Hanson's been at it forever, and she's got what, 7% of the vote. Libertarians have what, 1%, 2%. And I love John Ruddock and I love the Libertarian Party. I'm not a member, but I like what they're doing. But I just think it's to convince, like, you have to convince 51, or to get into power, what you have to convince 30 or 40% of the population to vote for you. 30 or 40% of Australians are not going to say, yeah, I think we should have more freedom. They're just not. They're fucking sheep.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points to that.
Yes,
that I,
sorry, I said a lot.
No, you did, and I've probably thought it 4 times. I was like, oh, I'd love to talk on that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that the political, my view on the Libertarian Party, and I do think that Ruddock actually agrees with this. I asked him this the first when he had just been elected. I had him on the show, and I asked him this: what is the primary role of a libertarian within Parliament? And it's actually not to affect change, because what, you have one vote among however fucking many in the upper house, without even counting the lower house. You have nothing. You are nothing. Even with Pauline Hanson's 7% of the vote, we're at 10, 15. You can't do anything. Your primary role is to use that as a pedestal to try and disseminate the ideology. Because the thing about libertarianism is that it's actually the most beautiful ideology that I've ever encountered. Like, it answers the questions of how humanity can best flourish. And it does this in a way that is not only the one that would create the most prosperity, but it's also moral. It just also happens to be the morally correct way, which isn't a given. Like, that sounds like it was always going to happen, but it's this wild coincidence that the most moral way to live is also the one that would create the most widespread prosperity. So my view is, like, if you know about this philosophy, if you know about this ideology, like, you'd want everyone to know about this. And if enough people could, then the problems would largely sort themselves out, because, your micronation, or however small the whatever it may be, I think if that sort of thing ever became a genuine possibility, a genuine outlet, or a genuine threat, the government would clamp down on it. The government would destroy it. You need this widespread understanding of why what the government does is wrong, is horribly immoral, illegitimate, and corrupt. And I mean, that it's so idealistic to say it that way, because now I'm saying that not only do I want 51% of people to vote for me, I also want 51% of people to understand what the philosophy is and to read more than just what's in front of their nose and what's but that's the uphill battle that I think, I don't know, maybe it doesn't take 51%, maybe it takes 10% or something to affect change. The other thing was, let's say Trump for a second. That is a genuine solution to all this. Not Trump himself, but the fact that Trump rose completely against the establishment, completely against the powers that be, like the state itself, the institution of the state, does not want Trump. The unfortunate outcome was that Trump is not a libertarian. He doesn't understand anything about how to actually turn the thing around. He did make a lot of deep state appointments, and as much as he talked about draining the swamp, he didn't have the first idea of how to drain the swamp. But if a Trump-like figure ever rose and was, knew the nexus of the problems, let's say Ron Paul became Donald Trump and he he didn't come anywhere near as close, but he got a fairly large following in 2008 and 2012. That could have done something. So they do say not to put your trust in a mortal
Yeah.
man, but that
Mm.
does seem like a possible solution.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah, it's just so rare for someone to have that much popularity. Like I don't know, I've never seen a politician that's
No.
as popular as Trump. Like people fucking love him. Like there's probably 10 people that love Albo as much as people love Trump. You know what I mean? It's so many.
Albo's own
Like,
party is looking for ways to
yeah,
backstab him and throw him
bro.
under the bus.
Yeah.
There's not even 10 people in the Labour Party that
It's
love him.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's not even married. That chick's probably like, fucking hell, how do I get out of this? Um, but yeah, I mean, so that's like, John Ruddick is doing a noble thing, right? He's happy to fight, like sail against the wind, so to speak. And I think that's great. But like, fuck, man. There's got like in Australia, there's got to be 50,000 like-minded people. I mean, I've got 20,000 people following me on Twitter, and I'm nobody. You know what I mean? And I just wonder like what would happen if you got 50,000, 100,000 people, and we're like, fuck it, we're taking over this. I mean, Australia's massive. I think it would be. I just don't see a situation. I just find it really difficult to believe that the government would roll in the tanks if it came to that. I mean, especially if you got enough resources to actually have a little bit of firepower yourself, and you're like, you know what, if you come to take away our micronation, it's actually going to get like, are they going to do that? I mean, maybe they will. They love their tax dollars. I mean, we saw that during COVID. Like, you just couldn't leave. I don't know, not during COVID. Sorry, what am I talking about? Like you have to pay to fucking leave Australia. It's just impossible. So they need like as many people paying tax as possible. So the state might fight against you. But I don't know. That's just the thing that I keep toying with is like, why would you fight uphill to convince people that don't want to be convinced? Like people are plugged in, they fucking love it. Let them be plugged in. We can go over here and do our own thing. And that's why I love Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is it's a non-violent opt-out. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of looking for that political solution. We've got the financial solution. Now we need the political, or I guess like geographic solution. You need like just a non-violent opt-out. I'd fucking love to opt out of the government. I don't like them. I don't want them in my life. Yeah.
I think that look, that idea, the move a certain number of people and non-violent and make it more of a hassle to reintegrate you than it would be to just deal with you peacefully, as in through trade and through allowing you to exist. I think that is the general thrust of the speech that I was talking about.
Bro, imagine if you had a low tax region on mainland Australia. Every Australian headquartered company would move here. Like, it would actually have, like, I think it would have weight. I mean, imagine if South Australia had 5% corporate tax.
Yeah.
Fucking every business would move here. The thing would grow like crazy. And I mean, that's why it's a shame why our federal government is in charge of taxes instead of the state governments, and why our states aren't small. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
There's in Italy, there's most people know about how the Vatican is its own state in Italy, but there's another microstate that you might know about it, San Marino, which is essentially a city state. It's only tiny. It's very close to my hometown in Italy, but it is its own country. Now everyone there's Italian. It's right attached to Italy. It's right on the Italian mainland kind of thing, but it's a city that is technically separate, and it has lower tax laws for whatever reason. It has, I don't know. I don't know the history of it enough. But just about every business in Italy has its headquarters in San Marino. So none of the Italian big companies are actually Italian. They're all from San Marino so that they pay the low taxes, and then they operate in all of Italy the way that they always would. So like that sort of thing could happen.
Of course, bro. Of course. Fucking Gina Reinhardt would move in. Like, you'd have everyone. We'd have everyone. I just think it would be so attractive. It'd be so attractive. And because there's no haven on this side of the planet. Like, if people want a tax haven, they've got to go to, Caymans or Channel Islands or whatever, and it's a long way away. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea, but I don't know. That's my solution.
I did want to ask you a little bit about your work before we are almost at the hour mark, but I so with now I don't know if you have much to do with other people within the creative field of writing, but I'm sure at some point you have. In my experience, and limited as it is, so much of the creative arts is completely run, dominated, monopolized, if you want, by the left-wing progressivism ideologies. Have you ever found difficulty navigating that? Have you found a way to detach? I mean, clearly you found some way to detach in some way, but did you ever experience that?
I've noticed it, but it doesn't. I just do my own thing. Like fuck them. I mean, I don't care about if I was entering in like a book prize or wanted to go to like a book fair or something. Like there's a 0% chance that anyone would ever have me there to do anything. But it doesn't really matter because we have the internet now, and I can just find people who I resonate with, which is really good. Yeah, there's this lady called Helen Dale, and I don't know the story exactly, but she published this book and she pretended to be like a refugee and published this book under like a fake name. And it got published, and then people found out that she was just faking it. And she was like, yeah, well, how am I going to get anything published unless I'm unless you're like a bisexual disabled refugee, like you're not getting anything published, you know what I mean? So I don't really care, but I do really want to get the novel that I'm working on published. And so I think if I face difficulty getting it published, I'll just do it myself. I don't care that much, but it would be nice to have a fucking publisher hook me up, print it for me and do some marketing or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I just don't care enough to be concerned about that. But you're right. Most creative people are communist.
Well, I mean, you could just decide to be transgender for a week while you get it published and then switch right back and then
Yeah,
you'd be okay.
Ziza.
So I know you said you didn't want to talk about American politics, but I guess this isn't really American politics. I mean, the whole world saw this. We were originally going to do this interview a couple of weeks ago, and I had this whole frame for a question, which is I was going to describe a dystopia to you, where the country was initially founded on rugged individualism and freedom, and slowly the government becomes bloated and corrupt, and the bureaucracy grows, and eventually they elect this president who is nothing more than a corpse, and it becomes really clear that he's not the real leader of a country, and et cetera, leading on to the without saying it, but describing the USA as it exists today, as if it were a dystopian plot line, right? Like drawing that parallel there. Since then, since we were originally going to record this interview, they attempted to assassinate the leader of the opposition, and then the corpse was bullied into stepping down by his own administration. I don't know, if you were writing a dystopian novel where that was the plot, I would say that's too unbelievable. Like that destroys my suspension of disbelief, and I'd stop reading it. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, well, fact is always better than fiction, or truth is better than fiction, or whatever it is, whatever that saying is. It's fantastic. I love watching all this play out. Like they couldn't assassinate Trump. I'm actually surprised that they deleted Biden instead of having a second assassination attempt. Like surely they've got an inside man that can feed him some poison or something, And it's so funny. I saw this newspaper article. It's like, the shooter was a lone gunman. I'm like, bro, you fucking pulled that on us before. Like no one believes you. Yeah, I don't like. I almost like don't know how to talk about Biden because he was just so obviously not there, and then people are acting like it's a surprise, and then he can't beat Trump. Like people are surprised by that, and now he's not in. I don't know. The whole thing is just so fucking bizarre. Like the government is obviously not being run by him. And that was just made painfully clear to everybody. And now someone made him resign. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with all that, to be honest, because Kamala Harris can't beat him. Obama knows that. That's why he hasn't endorsed her. And so, yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun to watch.
It's
Yeah.
the most fun thing to watch ever. I mean,
Bro, we
assuming there are
came this
no,
close to another timeline.
yeah.
That is absolutely fucked.
We came this close to the second civil war in the US, I think. Like, honestly, where else do they go from there?
And when
Like,
you think about how much programming there's been, like I'm really into this idea of what do they call it? Where the media like programs the way people think. And you know, we had that Civil War movie that the Obamas did. And what was the other movie that came out? Fucking hell. It was like a similar movie where the people went to the house and there was kind of like all these attacks and stuff, and that was creepy. And then there's House of Cards, like we're almost living a House of Cards scenario. You know how there was that cyber attack on Friday, or like power outage? Definitely
yeah,
wasn't a
yeah,
cyber
yeah.
attack. It's just so weird that that happened a few days after Trump was meant to die.
Mm.
I don't know, man. I'm just fucking like, I don't
I,
know. There's weird shit going on. I don't know how to talk about it without sounding like a crazy person, but it's all like all these things are happening around me.
my crazy person instinct is I hate watching this stuff live. Like I was watching the Biden Trump debate live, and there's something about like watching this, and it's I'd almost rather it all already have happened and hear what came out of it than watching it live, because there's something just so visceral about like this going one particular way or another particular way is history in the moment. And anytime there's any of that, like I just feel like it feels like anytime any of this huge ground shaking historical stuff happens, it's like how far is it from someone just launching a nuke? Like how
Mm,
far is it all from actually hitting the fan? Because all of this feels like we are spinning towards hitting the fan in some big way. So I prefer things have already happened than to hear about them or read about
mm.
them than to watch them live. It's almost too
Yeah.
tense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the nuclear, like, we're so close to nuclear war and just no one talks about that. Everyone's like, oh, let's send more money to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Like, let's push Putin even further. Like
Yeah.
the fucking the new British guys, like, yeah, I'm sending troops there or money or whatever. Like, bro, what are you doing? Just chill.
Putin's a crazy madman who would have taken over all of Europe if he had
Mm,
gotten Ukraine. But at the same time, he would never press the nuclear button. He knows better than to do that. He's far too sensible to actually launch nukes if he gets, threatened with debt. Like, okay.
I don't understand how we're meant to believe that, like, oh, bad man one day decided to take over the world just out of the blue. Like, what the fuck?
Well,
I
the
don't
good news is
understand
if
that.
if Trump truly is Hitler, and
Mm,
Putin truly is, a vicious dictator, at least we'll have peace across the whole world once Trump gets in, because they'll, without a doubt, align and become allies.
they'll be
That's
friends.
good news.
Yeah, I found Putin's like bromance with Kim Jong Un like so funny, or Kim Jong Il, the North Korean dude. Like, do you see the
Yeah, yeah,
pictures of them in the car? Bro?
I did. Yeah.
It was so fucking funny. Actually, what do you think about this? Like, why do you think, I did a tweet about this before, why do you think everyone is so like hysterical about the possibility of another Trump presidency? Like, he was president and things was
Mm.
fine. Things were fine, like maybe even better than now. I mean, it's hard to kind of judge, but probably better than now. Like, why do they think he's another Hitler? Like, what, where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, where does it come from? It's like he's a known quantity now. A lot of the hysterics made a lot more sense the first time around. I think it's because that's the only card they've got left to play, right? It's all a game of whatever propaganda you can spin that's the most believable, and that's like he's back to being Hitler. I mean, with the added caveat that now he's been betrayed and backstabbed by people who he had previously appointed, and now he knows how to get back at his enemies. So he's gonna use, the power of the state to chase people. But I think you're right. Like I think that's why he's polling much better now than he was when he first got elected, because I think that is not working. That story isn't working. But what other option do they have? Like, I mean, put
Mm,
yourself in the shoes of a Democrat. You are a lying piece of shit who will do anything and kill anyone to get into power. What move do you pull? There's almost nothing left.
yeah. Yep. Yeah. They've used it all. They've used it all. I'm actually interested to see what they do next. I don't know what the next play is. It'll be interesting.
I think the next play was the one that missed. And
Well, no, I mean after that, yeah, after they assassinate, I actually think the next play after assassination is like a civil war move. I think it is just like mass chaos and call off the election. Because yeah, I mean that's what I think. I mean that'd be cool if they did that, but like that's a lot to try to fucking pull off.
I also think it's not as high stakes for them as they seem to pretend, because Trump is, he's not allowed a third term, and I mean he's
Mm,
older anyway. He probably couldn't have done a third term even if it wasn't against the Constitution. But like this all ends. I think if they're smart, they engineer and try and maneuver the Republican Party, and a lot of the Republican Party is still that old neocon base. We saw how little
mm,
Trump managed to do with a lot of his congressmen and senators in the past. And they maneuver a Nikki Haley or some other piece of shit to be the candidate after him, and then it
mm,
doesn't matter, and then it's the same as it was before. Like, do you reckon the establishment really cares whether it's fucking Romney or Obama? No, they didn't
mm,
care. That was as low stakes as it went.
mm,
So I mean, yeah, I think a lot of it is hysterics, and they have to play it now because it's the only shot they've got to get a Democrat in. But I
mm.
don't think it really matters. Like,
No.
Trump's not going to save the world, unfortunately.
No, no. And yeah, that's the thing. You can't, that's why I try to get not too involved in like politics or politicians because they'll let you down 100%.
Well, if you do start a micronation, hit me up and I'll
Right.
uh I'll be
I'll give
there.
you residency, no worries. Citizenship for sure.
All right. Well, we had better wrap it up there. Have you got
Mhm.
anything you wanted to mention, anything you wanted to plug before we signed off?
No, nothing to plug. Follow me on Twitter at nonestlex. I'll be putting out a short story, kind of like a physical book type thing soon, maybe in the next month or so. And then, yeah, I've got a novel I'm working on, which will be fun. And then, yeah, just fucking hang out with me on the internet. That's
Hell
it.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. I've had heaps of fun. If
Yeah.
you don't already, you can follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Twitter. Other than that, thank you so much for your time again. We will catch you all next time.
Thank you, brother.